Okay, now we're recording. But one quick way I think about the extrinsic versus intrinsic, when you think about external, so that's just, it's a fancy word. Extrinsic is really just a fancy word of saying external. So if you think about all the X things that you can think of, exit, like anything that's going outward, and then internal versus intrinsic, that's the same thing. So into me, or like inwards, right? Anything that's that in prefix is going to help you with that one. Alrighty, so we've got a lot to do with respect to SCT today, and I know a lot of folks have been talking about self-efficacy for some time, so I really want to make sure that we get a lot of time to talk. So we're going to jump right into the lecture. We'll have just a bit of application, some reporting out from one of the readings that you had about adherence to some of our COVID protocols with respect to the SCT theory. So we'll go back to that reading and break out into groups to do some thinking about it. And then we will call it a day. Just a quick reminder. So Janae sent an email on Monday. I can see Kimberly, Katarina, and Michaela on the screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you got the comment that I sent to Janae's email, that reply? None of them are giving a thumbs up. Okay, good to know. All right, this is also Simone, why we got our wires crossed yesterday. Everything makes sense now. I replied to Janae's announcement, but apparently that doesn't go out to everyone. So now I know I'll have to just create a new announcement. But I was just saying that we wouldn't meet yesterday, and so some of us did individually anyway, but that Janae and I would be meeting on Thursday to get the results to your answers. So I said, for those of you who have been signing up to meet with me individually, you can go ahead and cancel those for right now, because we're going to get in the process of organizing you based on when you can meet. So some people have scheduled Calendlies with me as individuals. If you still want to meet with me because you think that I'm just fantastic, like, please come through. We can still have that meeting. But if you were doing it because you couldn't meet that time that Janae sent out, please feel free to cancel that, and we'll be in touch with you as soon as we can about when we're going to meet. So just one more time, for those of you that did not get a chance to fill out the when to meet, we're asking you to do that by tomorrow. Janae and I meet at 4 o'clock, so it will be really helpful if you have that filled out by then. If you schedule an appointment with me individually and you did it because of Janae's email and you wanted to just make sure that we were meeting, go ahead and cancel that individual meeting for right now, and we'll be sure to get back in touch with you with a time that does work for you. But if you do still want to meet with me, you're welcome to hold on to that appointment, and I will meet with you at that time. All right, thank you for that. Okay, so we asked this at the top of class, I believe 2 weeks ago. So we want to think back to the goals that we had. So some of us were talking about going outside and walking more. And then there were other behaviors that you all talked about with your group. We won't spend time doing the breakouts right now because it takes quite a bit of time to do that. So I just would love someone to come off mute. We're going to think about a behavioral goal that we actually didn't achieve. So not ones that you want to achieve or ones that you were able to achieve. We want to think about something you actually were not successful in achieving. And I want you to set the scene for us. Like, I want to know what the goal was, what the context was in which it wasn't fulfilled, and what happened. So somebody spilled the tea for me. What were you trying to do, didn't quite do, and give us the backstory. Oh, Sherlasia, you made a mistake and came off mute, and I saw it.
Okay.
Yep.
So my goal, like during this whole quarantine as well as currently, was to start sleeping earlier. I am a huge night owl. I feel like I'm more productive at night, and I've definitely gotten that into my head, where in the mornings I feel really lazy because I'm like, oh, I work better at night anyway. But over the summer, I had all this time, was sitting at home, and I started studying for the MCAT. So I was like, okay, I have to wake up early in the morning and study all day so I have time to chill at night. And that just never happened. So I would always wake up late, and then I would just end up studying basically until I have to sleep again. And now it's proving to be problematic because I do have classes during the day. So yeah, I gotta fix that.
You do. Okay, why don't you think you were able to do what it is that you wanted to do? What are some of the issues?
Um, I think one is definitely just I wasn't able to do it because I feel like I stick to things like that when I have more structure to my day, but because I literally had the entire day and it was completely up to me, I just got really lazy with it subconsciously. And then also, I think I do have difficulty sleeping. Like I don't sleep as soon as like I get into bed. Like it's really hard for me to fall asleep quickly. So I think because of that also, I would just end up staying up way late, even when I had no reason to.
Okay, thank you. And I think I continue to pronounce your name wrong. Is it Shrelasia or Shrelasia? Or
It's Sri
all
Lasia, but I go by Lasia.
Lasia? Okay, Lasia, thank you so much for that and for being put on the spot, even though I kind of had to force you to do that. I'm also going to call on Emma because Emma's had quite a semester, and I saw that Emma just put that mine was to be more physically active, and then I broke my foot. Talk to us a bit, Emma, about your trials and tribulations of this semester.
Yeah, so in July, I broke my wrist and I had surgery, and it was really hard to be physically active because with a cast. And I just got the cast off like a month ago. Um, and 2 weeks, and so I was talking to Lasia actually about this, and I was like, I need to like try to be more physically active, but like with my boundaries of my wrist, because you can't really do a lot. And so I was like starting to like try to do yoga again. And then actually 2 weeks ago, I broke my foot. So now I am back in my original stage, but obviously not really. My mom just said worse. I'm not really trying to make that change right now. I'm trying to just heal. But yeah, I will probably be experiencing the same behavior goal again in like 6 weeks.
Thank you for sharing, Emma. And hello, Mom. Good to meet you. um, so I'm just thinking back to what we were talking about a few weeks ago with respect to why we would want to do certain things, like what are some of the barriers that might come into play. And actually, Lasia mentioned the word lazy, which again, I'm just going to repeat for those of you who are listening and had the same ears that I did when Lasia was saying that they were studying for the MCAT, which is no joke, have already taken classes, I'm sure, to prepare for this journey. I'm just going to go ahead and probably say that that's not right. But, you know, do whatever it is that you need to do to think about your.
It's definitely not right.
Okay. All right. Just making sure. um, so Lassia's been working really hard to get to this position, and yet there are things, again, that we mentioned that are out in the world. Emma is trying to get to a position of working very hard, and there was a black walnut that she didn't see, and now here she is in another cast. So before we were talking about some internal things that we were identifying within ourselves that we knew were going on, but then some of our classmates helped us to understand some of the more conceptual and contextual things that were going on as well. So that's really where we're going to be zooming in on for today. So the SCT, where we're talking about the various constructs that go into our behavioral determinants, right? So right here we see the reciprocal determinants, and I can't see or determinism kind of model. These are reciprocal determinants of human behavior. So we have personal factors, which we'll jump into first, environment, or behavior. Now, again, sometimes I struggle with what models are, but tell me what it is that you see here and why there are all these lines and arrows and stuff. What does that mean? And how the heck, like, first of all, what is reciprocal determinism? What are all these lines and how the heck do all those things play together? Someone who hasn't spoken to me today, what does all this stuff on the screen mean?
I'll take a stab. That each factor, they all affect each other. Like, for example, you might behave a certain way because of your environment, but your environment also influences you to do the behavior.
Absolutely. So that's what I imagine all those arrows are for. Thank you, Carly. And then when we say reciprocal determinism, that sounds really fancy schmancy. Can someone make it a little more lay for me to understand?
That they all influence each other.
Right. So Vishaka was able to kind of marry what Carly was saying as well with what the arrows are showing, but also to say reciprocal are when we see, and this could also be shown in one line that has a two-headed arrow. Reciprocal means the back and forth, the interplay, the exchange between the two. So as I do family work, I don't look just at what parents are doing to children, because children have an influence on parents as well. So we see a reciprocal relationship between parents and children, or between family members. So in the same way here, you're seeing factors that are going back and forth to help to influence each other. So that's the reciprocal part. What is the determinism? What the heck does all that mean? Taz indicated they're all interconnected and determine the outcome. So that's really helpful. So determinism, thank you so much, is where we're seeing they determine the outcomes of this behavior that we're thinking about. So before, we were focusing a lot more on that individual level. So what will be happening personally. So we'll talk about the personal factors that are important within this theory. But the theory also talks about the environment, which is more of the social structure, and some of the behaviors that are going to be a part of the prediction of what it is that we're trying to do. So let's jump into personal factors. I'm going to say from the start, we're doing a lot of text. It's going to be a lot of text on these slides in just one short video. So please feel free to come off mute or to ask questions. I don't see the chat as much because there's a lot going on my screen. But if you do have something that you want to address, please feel free to jump off of mute. Okay, so some of the personal factors that we're going to be diving into today, these are the cognitive and emotional influences on behavior. So the things that are internal, the things that we're thinking about and feeling that influence our behavior. The relevant constructs that we're going to be zooming into are self-efficacy, your favorite construct of all time, the one that you've been mentioning for weeks now, outcome expectations, and knowledge. All right, finally, self-efficacy, what the heck is it? This is the level of a person's confidence in their ability to successfully perform a behavior. So this is not a global trait or personality characteristic. So you aren't born with a lot of self-efficacy, and we'll get to self-esteem, which is something that people confuse this with on the next slide. But self-efficacy is one's ability to do something in particular, a behavior in particular. So again, you're not born with it, and it's not something that's not malleable. You can absolutely change this. And so it's not global, and it's not something you're necessarily born with. It's something that you adapt to, something that you can grow in or shrink in to perform this behavior. Again, it relates to a specific behavior in a specific setting. So when I think about my work, for example, there's this idea of racial coping self-efficacy. Now, general coping self-efficacy, how well one can cope with, let's say, how stressed out I am in a classroom setting, right? So if I know that I'm stressed out, my professor just keeps talking and I don't understand why they just keep talking, maybe I take a quick break, go outside, get some air, take a stretch. But I know how to cope when things are just stressful for me in general. When we think about racial coping, we think about, and this is what's been a buzz the past few months, what happens when you see someone whose life is snuffed out in front of you on TV, when they're your age, when they look like you? What happens when you don't see justice for someone who has been shot and killed, by police force, and these are the same police folks that are supposed to be protecting and serving you? Like, how does all of that make you feel? These are the things that we consider in my lab and in a lot of the work that I do. So I might be able to cope relatively well with certain stressors in my life, but when it comes to racialized stressors or racism, that might be something that I'm not coping very well with. So even in the example of different self-efficacies, like specifically racial or general, you can see why it would be important to zoom in really quickly on what's that one behavior in particular, what's the context of that one behavior that we're talking about. You have to keep kind of narrowing in to make sure that you're talking about a very specific behavior in a very specific setting. Okay, so again, self-efficacy, how confident am I to perform this behavior, in my ability to perform this behavior. How able am I to do this is another way that I put it. So some of the things that people say are synonymous with self-efficacy, I'm going to skip to the second one. Self-esteem is something that you hear about a lot. So people will try to use self-efficacy and self-esteem in the same way. They're not the same. So self-esteem, and I won't go through each of these what their definition is, but I think it's really important for self-esteem, which is just how much do you like yourself? How esteemed are you in yourself? How on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you have a positive thought about yourself, with 10 maybe being the most positive? So that's one's esteem. That is something that we typically think of that is a little more trait oriented. So maybe not entirely trait oriented, but it's going to stay with you for a little bit longer. And it may be shaped by the things in your environment and your house. But this is, by and large, this is something that is not going to be specific to certain settings all the time. Self-efficacy, though, is about certain settings, certain behaviors all the time. There's no way around it. There is no just self-efficacy scale, but there are tons of self-esteem scales that are just like, what's your general level of self-esteem? How happy are you with yourself is a question that people ask. So those two things are very different, actually. The Kahoot asked about this concept of locus of control. So that is different from self-efficacy. How much control do you have over something is not the same as how much I believe I can do something. Those are two different components. Likewise, some of the mood characteristics like anxiety or depression, those are things that are more measures of what your current mood is rather than how well you can, or what your ability is to perform a behavior. And those remaining four, learned helplessness, persistence, motivation, concentration, all of these kind of play in the same sandbox. They're all things that can tell us a bit about why you might have a certain self-efficacy, but they are not the same. So just because you measure any of these things on this list does not mean that you know automatically what someone's self-efficacy is. All right, you all have been really underscoring this point in the past few weeks, so you all could probably tell me better than this slide can. But the idea of why self-efficacy is important is because in many studies across a wide range of health-related behaviors, persons with higher self-efficacy are more likely to change behavior than those with lower self-efficacy. So we've seen this in studies like an initiation of new behaviors as well as maintenance, putting forth greater effort, greater persistence of that effort, and performing behavior in a wider range of settings. So once you're able to understand if someone has a higher sense of their ability to conduct this behavior, then you know that you probably are going to see some of those elements on the right side of the screen as well. So it's in the same way that we were talking about the TTM, where the further along you get on that continuum, the more likely you are to maintain that type of behavior. It's the same for this continuum of self-efficacy. The higher you are in your belief that you can do something, the more likely it is that you're going to put forth the behavior, you're going to maintain it, etc. So it is important to understand what someone's self-efficacy is. We know that self-efficacy, I see you, Taz, 1 second. We know that self-efficacy impacts emotional reactions, the choices of behavioral settings that people will go into. Again, the amount of effort that they expend on the task performance and the length of time that that person will persist in the face of obstacles. So again, based on what we saw on the last screen, these are the really specific elements that self-efficacy would impact if we know what level someone's self-efficacy is. Taz, what's up?
Oh, I was just gonna say, self-efficacy can like vary over time, right? Like someone's self-efficacy to control like their addiction could definitely like be at a very high point in their life and then like relapse and then they have low self-efficacy. Like if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yep, so I think that's a great distinction to make as well. Not only is it between behaviors, right? So my self-efficacy to teach this class versus to be a participant in my 3:00 workshop. Those are two different levels of, or two different behaviors that I need to evaluate. What's my level of efficacy with respect to teaching? And then what's my level of efficacy to participate in a workshop? Those are two different things. But Taz brings up the good point too, that me teaching SCT today versus teaching TTM 2 weeks ago, that's teaching a specific concept or construct or theory, and that might differ as well. So over time, in 2 different weeks, I might have different self-efficacy levels for the same behavior, but it's a different context, right? So the context matters. Or over time, if I started with a really high self-efficacy to do something like control my drinking, and then 2 decades later, and I haven't been that successful, that might inform my efficacy for myself. Like, I don't think that I have the ability to do that. So I actually have a really low level 2 decades later. So you're right, it can differ over time, even if it's the same behavior.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At that point, that's sort of why it's important to like sometimes start like small with different interventions. So like, we talk about self-efficacy, it's definitely built over time based on like sometimes experience. So like when Dr. Anderson was talking about like her comfortability, like teaching certain topics, for example, like, teaching is something that I'm not comfortable with, but like as I have like been forced to like teach and to engage as a GSI over time, my self-efficacy to engage in teaching or in certain behaviors has increased after experience has not forced. Sorry. Well, I mean, not you, but I have to present twice today in other classes, and they're forcing me to. So the idea is that, as you gain experience in something, or as you sort of know that you're able to engage in like a certain small behavior, self-efficacy is increasingly built.
And like, just to like add to that, or like ask, like based off of that, like say if someone has been like super good on like controlling their behavior, or like not like eating, like for me, like I grew up eating a lot of junk food, and like I had to like break that behavior. But then being put like back in an environment where like I'm around my family who eats a lot of junk food, like my self-efficacy has gone down. Is that a correct form of usage of like, even though like I've been so like, is that a correct form of like the word self-efficacy, if that makes sense, like that my self-efficacy has like decreased because of my environment, if that makes sense?
So, again, I would be really clear. So let's actually just go back to the definition really quickly. So there are a few different components of the definition. A person's confidence in my ability is step one. Thank you, Yasmina. She is doing a great job. Thank you. Yes, so a person's confidence in their ability is step one. So just because you don't do a behavior, which is step two, we'll get to that in a second. Just because you don't do it more often doesn't necessarily tell you about your own self-efficacy to do it. So I think I'll give you a preview of what we're going to be talking about. I love sugar. Love it to pieces. Can I not eat it? Absolutely. Like I'm also just a person whose personality is very much like, if I put my mind to it, it's not happening. So my self-efficacy to not consume sugar is very high. My ability, I'm confident in my ability not to eat sugar. Do I eat sugar every single day? Love it. Fantastic. Wonderful. Like it. So those two things don't necessarily need to be the same, but when we talk about correlations, the more we know about someone's self-efficacy, we can usually predict their behavior. So I hope that that's helpful, that just because you're in a home situation where you're eating more, perhaps junk food, it's more available. It may be that you're conducting the behavior of eating it, but are you confident in your ability to eat healthy foods or to reduce junk food might be the question that we need to focus on for self-efficacy, Taz.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Okay. And
Also, yeah, I love sugar too.
then, yes. Holly, did you want to ask that out loud?
Sure. I was just saying, so would the specific, like her perception be the key point there? That she perceives she is able or is not able to refrain from eating junk food, and it's not just her ability to do that or not do that?
So it's that keyword is confidence. So perception
Okay.
is a part of it, but it is like on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident that I can conduct this behavior, that I'm able to do this thing. Not that I am doing it, but that I can do it. So that word can is really important. I think perception is getting us closer, but how confident, how sure am I that I can do it might be another way of saying that sentence. Is that helpful, Holly?
It is. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And then just to back up a bit in the chat, Jadrian
Jasmina, that's all right.
Oh, Yasmina. No, I saw Jadrian did also say something, but the chat was busy. So Yasmina also asked about resilience. So resilience is one's ability to overcome adverse events or challenging circumstances. So those are two different ballparks. This is like a really common example of if you've been exposed to a trauma, especially something like a hurricane or something of that sort. How able are you to like overcome some of those challenging hurdles? That's like the thing has already happened and now I want to see how well I can be, versus there's the behavior in front of me. How much do I think I can do that thing? If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yep. All right. And now Jadrian. So self-efficacy is your belief in yourself to perform the behavior. Yep. Awesome. Any more questions on self-efficacy as we're scooting along?
I had a question, Professor.
Yep.
If you were to measure self-efficacy in a survey, how would you go about it if there's no scale that you could use?
Just you wait. It's on the next slide. You are perfectly timed for us. So thank you for that, Gabriella.
Thank you.
Yep. So let's get into Gabriella's question. So if we were to diagnose self-efficacy, if we needed to assess it, these are some of the strategies we'd use, and then we'll get an explicit example in the next few slides. So you'd need to know something about their previous experience and their knowledge. You would also want to assess things like their emotional state, like anxiety, stress, or arousal. But to say again, just because you know someone's anxiety level or their depression or their mood or their state, that's not going to tell you what their self-efficacy is, but it might let you know why their self-efficacy is what it is at that moment. So one can imagine if I have a high level of anxiety, it might be really challenging for me to have a high level of self-efficacy. My thought that I might be able to do something if I'm depressed or anxious seems really hard to predict. So that would be something that lets you know why one's self-efficacy might be low, but it's not going to exactly predict what one's self-efficacy is. So I hope that makes sense. That third bucket, confidence around managing situations related to behavior of interest. So maybe it's not that one thing, but like I was saying with respect to teaching, right? So if I'm teaching different topics, maybe you knowing my confidence around various courses would be really helpful. And then we can diagnose, oh, wow, so Dr. Anderson really struggles with that one topic in particular. That's a diagnostic strategy to help me isolate, oh, it's not your self-efficacy about teaching, it's about teaching maybe that one topic that's really challenging for you. So we would go through those types of diagnostic strategies to assess what's going on with one's self-efficacy. So let's look at Gabriella's question here. So an example, if we're thinking about how confident are you that you can change some behavior, an example question would be, how confident are you that you can make this pie when you are not watching the YouTube instructional video, right? It looks beautiful, it's fantastic, I'm making it along with the video. Uh-oh, the video's gone off. How confident am I not at all, not happening. Can't do the cross stitching. It's just a 0 for me. Like, it's not going to happen. So that might be what we need to do, Gabriella, is to really get to the granular level. So again, that keyword of confidence. How confident are you that you can do this behavior, right? In this situation? That gets really granular very quickly. So that lets me know about the self-efficacy of this person to make a pie without watching a video. It gets that granular. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right, I see your question, Jadrian. I think it is coming up, so I'm going to hold on to that. Oh, yeah, so it's right here. So what are some of the ways that we develop our self-efficacy? So if we have previously done it before, either in practice or by mastering, so by either doing it once or by practicing to get up to that point, our self-efficacy can be improved. So the idea that one doesn't have to practice, or as I tell my students all the time, some of you like to be one take home, you like to sit down, you like to, you know, put your essay down, you think that that's it, you walk away, you're like, I just wrote the best essay on earth. And then I get it and I'm like, error, spelling, what's this? I don't understand. And you're like, that doesn't feel very good. Okay, but we're gonna work to get to the best content that you can turn in, or the best verse you can lay, like whatever it is you want to get up to that point. And then maybe you could be one take home, get on the mic, drop the verse, and then walk out the studio. So just saying, practice is good. Okay, vicarious experience. So this might be a way of thinking about why virtual reality, or why being in a situation where you can practice in a setting that's not you actually there. So why you would take mock exams for the MCAT, for LASIA, for example, why someone would have a VR headset. That's what we're doing with our discrimination measure, so that the youth aren't actually in a discriminatory situation, but they're getting the practice of it. So this is just another way of thinking about practice, not in that setting, so that you're able to get them ready when they are in the setting. And then social persuasion, so stuff that you all have mentioned before with respect to who are these people that are cueing us or telling us that it's okay to do these things, or that say that they can do it, and if they can do it, I can do it. So these are often our celebrities or people that we hold in high esteem. If those are people that can do it, then we think our ability increases as well. So those are some of the sources that we can pull our self-efficacy from. And then finally, from a practical perspective, how would you use self-efficacy to counsel clients? If our efficacy expectations are low, or if a client's efficacy expectations are low, you can help to build self-esteem by starting with simple, achievable tasks and provide positive reinforcement for task accomplishment. So again, for that pie, as an example, I don't know how to do laced stuff. Like that's not my ministry yet, but I could probably do the filling. So step one might be, can you do the filling of this pie? Great, check. Okay, can you roll out this dough? Probably not. Probably it'll take me a time or two. Got it, great. Can you start to cut these slices? That might take me 5 or 10 times, right? So you start to build up and break down these really challenging tasks into smaller, achievable components. You can also help your client focus on positive aspects of an incomplete performance. So this is often, I use the example of YouTube when it first came out. Instead of having thumbs up or thumbs down for if you like something or you don't like something, it had a bar. It had a green color for the people who liked it, the like percentage of people who liked something, and a red color for people who didn't. So you might see 98% of that bar shaded green and maybe 2% shaded red. But as you all have already indicated, even with Kahoot, right? Like red psychologically is bad. Like we're just like, oh, something's wrong if we see it as red, right? So people's eyes often avert it to like, what is that 2%? What's that 1%? What's that very small percentage of people who don't like this content? But here we go, having 98% that's green. So when I'm working with clients, I try to help them to focus on what's the green, right? Like keep your eyes away from that red, go back to the green. So oftentimes if people are trying to give up smoking, trying to do whatever, they'll focus on the one failure instead of the 10 positive attempts that they had before that. You can help your clients to show confidence, or you can show your confidence in the person's ability and provide sincere encouragement. So on the last slide, we talked about a social cue. You can be someone who's acting as an expert, or someone who's giving them positive encouragement to say, I know that you can do it. I've seen you do things like this before. I know that if you continue to try, you can achieve this goal. So you can inject some confidence into them. You can identify similar others who have accomplished the task through modeling, for example, and we'll get to modeling in just a bit. And then again, for the assessment point, you can teach specific skills to overcome problem areas. So this, again, I'll go back to the teaching example. If I think that I'm a fire professor, generally speaking, like 98% of the things I teach are like fan-flippin-tastic, but then there's that one class that every year just is so hard to teach. I don't know what's wrong with that. That's helpful in identifying, oh, there's only one problem area. Let me zoom in on that to get skills on how to improve on that, versus I'm going to teaching workshops all the time that are just going to teach me how to teach. Like maybe I have that larger skill, but there's a specific context that I need to focus on to make it better. So you can help your clients if they feel, confident to do certain skills, but maybe it's them smoking because their colleagues are smoking and they're on a work break. How do you help them when they're in those specific situations? Those are the types of granular levels that we would be getting to with self-efficacy. I think that's it for self-efficacy. Let me just click. Yep, so that's it for self-efficacy. I know that was something that we wanted to talk about for some time, so I wanted to spend some time on that. Are there any other questions for self-efficacy before we move on?
Professor Anderson, so going back to the health belief model, just thinking about what you just explained about self-efficacy and how that's, I guess, shaped by your previous experiences and kind of cues to action. How does that, I guess, how do you separate all these things into cues to action, self-efficacy, and then perceived barriers, for example?
Yeah. So what I would say, and this is where actually the pie metaphor came into class when I was talking to a student a few weeks ago about this idea of a pie. As we're explaining some of the theories that we're talking about, generally speaking, pies require some of the same ingredients. So eggs, butter, milk, like maybe that's found sugar and flour, right? That's the foundation of your pie. As you're starting to get more specific, like a health belief model, maybe you add chocolate chips to that one. Or if you're talking about SCT, you're adding maybe blueberries. So there might be an ingredient or two that's different, that's going to require someone to think about the composition of the ingredients for that specific pie. But at the fundamental level, a lot of these theories are talking about very similar components or ingredients. So I would encourage you not to think about like how do you differentiate between some of those similar characteristics, because sometimes they are the exact same. Sometimes self-efficacy in HBM is the same as it is going to be in SCT, but really what are the unique ingredients of each theory that make them what they are? Why does that compilation or the concoction of those specific ingredients make that a unique pie relative to the others? So here, again, we're moving from, even though HBM does have some, a few more social constructs than some of the more independent ones, what SCT is allowing us to see is that there are personal, there are social, and then there are various behavioral, like the ability to actually do that behavior that's going to be a part of it. So that's what I would argue is different, is that they are going to share some of those similar ingredients, but what is it about this interpersonal and intrapersonal model that differs from some of the more interpersonal ones that we focused on? It's the addition of the social environment for this. So now we're still mainly on the personal factors, even though self-efficacy can be influenced by social, but when we hop over to the social components in a few slides, that's going to be the ingredient that's really different for SCT.
I see. Thank you.
Yep.
Can I just add one last thing?
Sure.
So if we're doing if we wanted to measure like our program participants, like I guess self-advocacy, like to see if like our program actually helped them understand and like improve their, I guess, their confidence to improve their behavior. So one way to do that would be a pre-test saying how likely or how confident are you in like using like I guess like if we're doing a weight loss like program, like how confident are you in using like the gym equipment, like on a scale of 1 on a Likert scale, and then on a post test you would do the same question,
That's
and then
right.
those there was an increase to see if you helped their self-efficacy.
Right. So you're able to look at two things. So what you just asked, their confidence in their ability to do the behavior. So that's going to be a change score. You would anticipate it being a higher score at the end. You would also take a look at things, and we'll get to them. Well, actually, we won't have time today, so I will introduce what these things are. But you can look at how well they're using the equipment, so how competent they are, for example. So that's when you might be pulling in some SDT stuff to get a sense of how well they have used the equipment. Did they actually lose weight? So those are some of the more concrete outcomes that you can think about. But with respect to their belief in their ability to use it, yes, you would ask a pre-post and see their change score.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right, folks. So we have, this is like the most slide heavy talk. We have about 7 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is at least get through as many as we can, and then just do an introduction to some of the other components that are within this theory. Sorry. Okay, so outcome expectations. These are beliefs about the behavior that lead to a certain outcome. So these can be physical or social outcomes, and they can be self-evaluative, like if I'm comparing it to an internal standard. So I'm going to jump to some more tangible, like understandable elements of this. So with respect to what we just talked about with efficacy, if I have high self-efficacy, for example, taking meds on time, I might say a sentence like, Ed believes he is capable of taking his meds on time. So he has the confidence or the belief that he can do this thing. And that's why Ed takes his medicine, right? An outcome expectation, sorry, I gotta move your faces. An outcome expectation may be that if I have a positive outcome expectation, Ed believes that taking his meds on time will lead to improvements in his heart disease. So it's not just Ed thinking, oh, I can take my medicine, right? So that's efficacy. Ed's confidence that he can take his medicine is more related to efficacy. Whereas Ed's outcome expectations is Ed taking his medicine on time will improve my heart disease. So it's this chain effect that not only can I do this thing, but me doing this thing will lead to this outcome. So my outcome expectation is really just what's the belief in me doing this behavior and what is it related to? That's really the question for outcome expectations. So again, in this example, if you change some behavior, how likely do you think it is that some specific outcome will occur? So again, to that assessment question, how would we diagnose, how would we assess this in a client or someone we're working with? So for example, if you eat less sugar in your food, do you think it is likely that your risk of serious health problems will be reduced, Dr. Anderson? Huh? This is me asking myself, trying to remember that just because the pie is lovely and we're going into October and Thanksgiving for next month, that I don't have to consume everything. So again, if I change a behavior, how likely is it that it's connected to that outcome is the question for outcome expectations. And how would we use outcome expectations to counsel clients? Well, if our outcome expectations are low, it would be helpful to focus on immediate and tangible outcomes, not just long-term risk reduction. So in psychology, we would call this chaining, That means to connect it to something smaller so that those smaller things will then connect to the larger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then finally that monster goal that's all the way at the end. So you want to focus on something right in front of them and pretty small so that they can get the taste of success. You can also explain in lay terms the relationship between the desired behavior and the outcome, where possible show models or examples. So what we just showed, that 3-box model for ed, that might be really helpful in saying, all you got to do is take this on time. If you take that on time, you're going to have this type of outcome. So really demonstrating and showing to clients what's possible. And then what's really important is to focus on outcomes relevant to the person, not you. So these may include other non-health related outcomes, but just because I think smoking is such a important one, because like I talk to people all the time about their health and why I think smoking is important, and they'll hit me back with why they use it, which is often to reduce stress or to get out the house, to get a break. So you want to really use language or thought processes that are relevant to your client and not just to you, to help them out. Okay, I know that there are probably questions. If you have them, feel free to drop them in the chat. But again, we're running quite tight on time today. So the last component of that internal, or the personal factor, the cognitive, is the degree of, with respect to knowledge, the degree of accurate and reliable information one gets. I'm going to say this time and time again, this class is nonpartisan. My only hope is that everyone votes at some point during the semester, but I do want to point out how things differ with respect to the source with which you get your knowledge. So with respect to mail-in voting, there are a number of people who identify voter fraud as a major problem, and those people tend to be Republican leaning, in contrast to a smaller percentage of Democrats and Democratic leaning independents who say the same thing. So you've got a smaller percentage of people who are saying that mail-in voting is a fraud. But what's really important to me in this Washington Post article was this idea of where people are getting that information. So if you kind of jump to the bottom, you'll see that if you're, for those folks who tend to watch Fox News, that's where you're going to see that mail-in voter fraud is a major problem for those Republicans. So about 61% of Republicans whose only major source of election news is coming from Fox are going to say that mail-in voter fraud is the problem. But even within the same party, that figure falls to 23% among Republicans whose major news sources do not include talk radio or Fox News. So I know that that went a little different from our pie examples, but I thought it was really important to say it's not just enough to say like one group of people is more knowledgeable than the other. That's not true. In fact, here we're seeing a distinction between where those people who identify as Republicans are getting their source of information from. So I share that because if you're working with clients, sorry, excuse me, if you're working with clients who identify as one thing, that may not even be enough to know what are their sources of knowledge that they're getting from. How can you help what we would call in the psych world, psychoeducation? How do you give them education that is grounded in science and has a reputable source to it when you're providing information to folks? So how can we make folks more knowledgeable about the truth behind certain behaviors? Okay, no way in the world we're getting through this like at all, just not possible. So I'm gonna just do a very high level overview. Environment is another factor within reciprocal determinism that we would be talking about and that I will happily post so that you all can get a chance to take a look at what's going on. So the relevant constructs here are observational learning, normative beliefs, and social support, and opportunities and barriers. Again, to Gabriella's point, some of the same components we've seen in other theories. So it's not about, when do we know which of those components goes into which theory? It's, wow, a lot of these theories use a lot of this similar constructs. What makes it unique? What makes this certain combination specific to that model? So when you get a chance, take a look at this observational learning Video, it's a 4-minute video of Bandura's famous bubble doll experiment, so that you see how children pick up some of the practices of aggression. So these are some really famous psych studies on aggression. It's not a natural, if you just put a child in a room with a doll, they're not going to just naturally hit it. But when they watched adults, especially adults who looked like them, do it, they were more likely to engage in that behavior. So take a look at that when you get a chance. So similarly, the conditions that would enhance the effectiveness of that model, when it's similar to the subject, a higher status model, multiple models, so multiple people doing that behavior. And then this final component has these two. So if you've had to struggle a little bit to get it, you don't have as much efficacy, and then you finally achieve it, that can lead to higher efficacy. So when you cope and struggle for just a little bit, or if you're working toward mastery where you're trying to be very skilled in your performance, you might have very high efficacy, and maybe the task isn't that difficult. So you're working your way to showing your self-mastery. So essentially, if you struggle just a little bit, or if something's really easy, that can enhance the effectiveness of that modeling. And finally, I think the 4 processes that influence observational learning, if you are attentive to it, if you can retain the information, if you're able to produce that behavior, and if you have the proper motivation. Okay, finally for behavior, some of the behavioral factors. If you have behavioral skill acquisition and exercise of control over the behavior, we would want to look at how behavioral skills make a difference, your intention to perform those skills, and are those skills reinforced. So very quickly, the 5 ways behavioral skill acquisition and self-regulation are achieved. If you're able to monitor yourself, that's a really helpful way of saying, am I achieving my goals? Am I skillfully doing this behavior? Did I meet my goals would be the second question. Feedback about the quality of the performance and how to improve. Self-reward, or the provision of tangible and intangible rewards. And self-instruction or self-critique before and during performance of a complex behavior. I'm going to skip past this one, but just to let you know that there is an implementation or like an activity related to, I'm not going to go through all of that, but this is for physicians who want to increase certain behaviors in their clients. Just to let you know, there's tons of, wow, that's some really annoying animation, sorry. Tons of information here on what that looks like. All right, self-regulation, again, not a lot of time, so I'm gonna just kind of skip past some of these. Self-regulation, self-monitoring, but I wanted to get to this point that if you're making an observation, so how do you help people as they're engaging in behaviors to observe what it is that they're doing? You can record the frequency of the behavior within a time frame, the duration of the behavior, how long they were engaging in it, and their feelings about their behavior as they were doing it. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So if you have a chart like this, you can kind of keep progress of the behavior that you're engaging in. So the number of times that you did something over a certain amount of days might be an example. You can get really granular of like what day, what time, what was the activity, and again, how it made you feel. That might really be able to give you some access into what it is that your client is experiencing. Diary studies that really get at exactly how many times something was done over a certain amount of time can be really helpful if you really need to track very specifically what it is that you're doing. And then again, one more example of eliciting more of those feelings when you are engaging in or are not engaging in that behavior. That can really be helpful for clients as well. All right, when you do set goals, you want to set goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, or SMART. So if you've never heard of that acronym, this is just a really useful acronym for you or your clients to think about. So you want to have goals that are specific, so not so wide, like I want to eat better. That's not really saying what it is that you want to do. So I want to intake at least 4 vegetables might be a specific goal. The same with measurable. So I know that if I don't hit 4, like the difference between 3 and 4, so that's something that I can measure the difference of. Attainable, so I'm not going to eat 100 pieces of fruit today, but it's something that throughout my day might be more attainable. So 4 might be a breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. And then is it realistic? So again, it's connected to attainable as well. And then timely, is this something that is achievable within the given amount of time that I said I want to eat 4 starting, next week? Is that something that is going to be able to get done? All right. So I know that we sped very fast through those last few things, but I wanted to give you all the opportunity to think about what the SCT looks like in real time. So specifically with COVID. So I'm going to come off of screen share. All right. So for, sorry, my computer always does this. For the in-class activity sheet, there we go. I'll share the Google Doc here. For the in-class activity sheet, take a look at the reading that you all had for today with respect to COVID. And we're gonna take a look at what types of, sorry, it's opening up for me. We're gonna take a look at the characteristics and behaviors that are specific to the SCT model that we just ran through very quickly that predict adherence. So take a scan through the article, pick out some of the elements that are specific to the SCT. And then based on what you've learned in class and also from what you've observed in the world around you, what are some of the ways that you think you can beef up the constructs of SCT for greater adherence? So for example, if there was if you were looking at some of the personal factors, maybe if there was efficacy that was mentioned in the article, if efficacy does predict adherence, what are some of the ways that you might be able to beef up someone's efficacy with respect to mask wearing in particular? So again, we went through quite a few like smaller constructs that make up those larger 3 constructs of personal, environmental, and behavioral. So take a look at what in the article goes into those 3 buckets, like efficacy for personal, and then take a look at if it influenced in adherence, what are some of the ways that we can help folks today to become more efficacious or more model, for example. So just any of the things that we mentioned today, how can we beef those things up if they're part of the SCT model? Does that make sense for folks? Okay, I'm gonna start to break out. If you have questions, feel free to ask them while I'm doing the breakout. Okay, you'll have about 8 minutes, sorry. Have fun. Emma, I know that was not enough time, but did it feel like you got anything accomplished? Allison, Emma, Tiffany?
Yeah, no, we
Okay.
definitely had some discussions.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay, folks are starting to trickle back. So I know that that was super, super quick. Let me get one example of something that you found in the article and one way to increase it. Anybody? Super quick. That means somebody.
So,
Yep.
so my group, we discussed like about people touching their faces being a big issue. And so we
Mhm.
discussed maybe if it's like a self-soothing thing that maybe people can touch their hands where they know they're going to wash their hands more frequently and they might not be able to like wash something that's so close to their face, so close to like spreading the disease.
Okay. And Leah, what construct was that a part of?
So we talked a lot about having that behavioral factor
Okay.
of encouraging people to take on like a behavior on their own
Okay.
instead of just necessarily like telling them this is the only way to act, more so like encouraging a behavior.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for your group and for everyone who participated. So I would again think about the article that you read. It had a number of ways of characteristics that were related to adherence. So when you're thinking about how do we help people to adhere, and here are some of the constructs from the SCT that are a part of that adherence. That's again, making just those real world connections. So it's not just theory out in the world, it's theory that's actually being useful at this time. I would encourage you to take a look at articles like that as you're reading to say, if we could influence this component of SCT today, what might that look like? How might that be impactful to my population or to the people who I'm serving? So great work. All right, as we're finishing up, I know it is time. So if you got to hop off, please feel free to do so. But what's one thing that you learned today? Let me know. How can you apply it to your life? And what do we still need more clarity on? Anybody jump on in? For one, what's one thing you learned today? We got some chat action, more practice with this theory. Okay, Carly, thanks for that. More chat action. Isabel indicated, I learned that focusing on my failures is not helpful and that trying to focus on my successes is better for motivation. Absolutely. Zoe indicated self-efficacy and self-esteem are not synonymous. Fantastic. Haley indicated, asked, will we get more info on the midterm next week? Sure will. And Nick asked, or said, need more practice with outcome expectations. Cool. And Haley said, thank you. All right, well, we'll stick around for a little bit. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, thanks so much for your time today. I know that was a lot, but all the slides will be available for you after class starting tomorrow. And have a great weekend and take wonderful care. Bye. Thanks, everyone.
I have a specific question about vicarious experiences.
Okay.
For an example, so like virtual reality or mock interviews or trials, would visualization, just like in your head, picturing something happening, would that count, or is that like not concrete enough, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mary. I know that there is a literature around this, so I'm not going to lie and say that I know offhand what the answer is. I would suspect that that'll get you closer, but it's not going to be as good as going through motions and actually getting some practice in. Mm-hmm. So it's certainly better than not doing anything. But then I would say the next step is visualization. The next step after that would be some sort of vicarious. And then the best step would be to actually take a stab at what the activity or behavior is.
Okay, thank you.
Janae is shaking her head. That's enough for me. So we've got the expert saying yes on that.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
A question. I might need to just set up like a time to maybe discuss it more so, but I know we've like been learning like different kind of theories. So basically on my job, what I do is like work the social media page, and I'm wanting to know like how do you incorporate these theories when we're trying to market certain programs to people? Like how do we decide which theory to use? I feel like I should make, like I said, make an appointment to see one of you on this, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's basically my question.
Yeah. You know what? To me, Jadrian, it's really about knowing your population and what is important for your population. So we'll be talking next week about the theory that I helped to develop with respect to racial discrimination. And so I took stress and coping, and then I took efficacy and this idea of competence. And that's taking from a lot of different theories that we already learned from already and putting it into one theory. And the reason that I did that was because we know what racial discrimination does to Black populations in particular with respect to stress. We know that it impacts their coping. We know that we feel less competent to engage in certain types of behavior. So the things that are most compromised with respect to racial discrimination are the elements that I bring up in my theory. So when I'm talking to Black families about racial discrimination, those are the constructs that I'm going to be focusing on. So I'm sharing that with you because if you are a part of a job and your job seeks to serve certain people or to, you know, facilitate certain behaviors, you need to think about which of the theories that we'll be going through map on the best to that specific group. And then rather than saying things like, with the social, you know, cognition theory, we'll be utilizing these constructs. So you're not talking like that, but you're going to pull from the theory to say, like, does it ever feel like it's hard to, you know, feel like you could do something really well? Well, if that's the case, you know, you're using the language of the people you're serving as well, rather than the jargon. So I hope that was helpful. You have to really know who you're targeting, what the behavior is, what the outcome is, in order to determine what's the thing that's going to be best in that application.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Janae, too. I'm looking at the chat.
Yeah, and to add to that point, like, again, like, it is important to know your specific health behavior, and there's certain theories that are used specifically for certain topic areas. Like, for example, I love the health belief model because I'm interested in sexual health and condom usage, and people love to use the health belief model for that specific content area. And then also that's why also, like, when you're reading these different articles, I find it helpful to actually like critique the articles in a sense and figure out like, what is this lacking? Because no theory is perfect. So even if it is something like thinking about who created the theory or thinking about why they created the theory. So critiquing the theory and recognizing what the limitations are about certain theories will sort of help you to figure out whether the theory is appropriate for your specific content area and your specific population of interest.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Gabriella, you still with us?
Oh yeah, I just had a question, but it's very specific. So if anybody else has questions, they can go first.
I think you're the last of them. So it's me and you. Come on.
Yeah, so I'm using the health belief model in my thesis project right now. And one thing that me and my committee, we're struggling with is how do we measure self-efficacy? And so today when you were talking about, you know, how do we measure that in a survey? And we could ask them, you know, how confident you are in my thesis, we're looking at utilization of genetic counseling services. So how confident are you that you, in your ability to schedule and keep an appointment with the genetic counselor, right? We thought about that, but then just learning about all these theories too, like I'm recognizing that there are so many other things that play into your self-efficacy. So for example, today we talked about anxiety levels, and then just thinking more broadly, mistrust in healthcare practitioners in general.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, you know, like if we are asking about all these, I guess, more environmental and systemic factors, should we measure that in the self-efficacy construct, or does that go into the perceived barriers and cues to action? For example, like how do we make that distinction when we're doing the statistical analysis for all these constructs and how they predict behavior?
Yeah, so you're asking a question that will never not be asked, and the way that you're asking it is a little different. So I'm going to say how I heard you ask it, which is, when there are 1 million things that influence behavior, how do you A, have enough time to do it, B, not overburden the participants when you're asking these questions, and then C, make a model that is not so cumbersome that when you run this model, it doesn't even run, right? So I don't know how far along you are statistically, but if a model is saturated, and this is when, again, I go back to pie, if you have way too many ingredients in there, then your pie is not going to rise. It's not going to do anything that you need for it to do. It's going to be saturated in the same way a statistical model will be saturated. So the question might be, are there ways that you can have single items that can pick up on some of these questions that you have, like how much do you trust, your providers, or have you ever had challenges with, the system before? If there are single items that you can ask that will let you know more about this individual, that's really helpful. But you will never be able to ask every single thing that you would need to know about what these external factors are that are impacting their behaviors and their choices. So that's why we use best estimates, or we use theories to guide us. So if we can't use every single one, use your best knowledge of what theory is going to get you closest and stick with those variables. Again, maybe 1 or 2 items from another measure might be helpful just for you to be informed, but you will never be able to measure everything. So use the best approximation that you can to get you there. Janae, do you have additional thoughts on that? Or Gabriella?
I think that made sense. I just was sort of curious as to if that would be even appropriate to address like that within, what was like one specific construct that you mentioned, Gabby? Was it self-efficacy in terms of, I think
So I mentioned self-efficacy, cues to action, and
barriers.
perceived barriers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Anderson said to make the most sense. I'm not quite there yet.
You still trying to measure everything, Janae?
Right. Measures that I think exist for what I'm trying to do don't even exist. I mean, don't exist for like the topic that I'm trying to address. So yeah, this is interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say this and then I unfortunately have to jump off, but essentially the thing that I mentioned at the beginning with respect to burden and saturation is why we don't have every single construct or measure that we want when we're talking to participants. So you have to remember that your participants are human, right? So your master's study is going to be fantastic, wonderful. And if it's just theoretical, so if it's not going out to humans, you can do whatever the heck you want. You can make it 5,000 items long, right? But once that comes into my hand, you're asking me, someone who may not even be engaging in the behavior that you want in the first place, maybe because I'm so taxed and tired and have 3 jobs, like, right? So all those variables that are already a part of this, if you're now asking me to fill it out, you need me to fill it out. You need it to be finished. So what's the most compact, comprehensive way of asking that? Again, is by sticking to the measures of the theory that you're utilizing, and maybe a single item or 2 that'll help you to learn more. Or maybe it's an interview item. Maybe you're only asking certain clients on an exit survey, that type of question, but you don't want to burden the participant. You don't want to burden the model.
Mm-hmm. So I guess then the best proxy for self-efficacy in terms of how we measure it would be asking them how confident they are. Like that would be the most, I guess, the best proxy to self-efficacy, instead of asking, what their anxiety.
So when you asked the question, it was actually a little cumbersome. So when you said like, what is the confidence in my ability to schedule an appointment with this person? That's actually a little different than what you said your master's thesis project was on. So I would start with the top of the question, which is I am confident in my ability to, that's the start. And then when you think about all of the things that it takes to not only go to that appointment, to keep that appointment, to schedule it, to make sure that you're seeing that person, you want to think about all of the steps that it would take, because scheduling an appointment might be hard for someone that doesn't have like a smartphone or a landline or something to keep it. But once they know when their appointment is, do they have a ride? Do they have the time? Like you have to really think about each of the steps that it would take and their confidence in their ability to do those discrete things. So it may not just be one item that measures self-efficacy. We have 28, for example, that measure people's ability to have this racial conversation with their families. So you are trying to get a sense of how confident are you to do the following things that then make up what it is that you're saying is this genetic counseling meeting, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah. So that what we showed today, you know, as an example is just like one very specific one, but for a measure, you would think about how do we get every single element that goes into what this greater behavior is, and then maybe like what's the sum of that, right? Or like what's the average of that? That's going to give you the best self-efficacy for that whole kit and caboodle.
I see. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. Just credit me in your master's thesis. Like I don't need much, just like a shout out on the page, your cover, maybe a picture of me, something.
Sure, I will.
All right, my dear. Well, I will see you all, and Janae, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great day, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.